The issue of American security and American freedom really doesn't get enough discussion here in the United States Senate. And it's my view that the senator from Kentucky has made a number of important points this day. And I'd just like to take a few minutes to lay out my views on this issue and then pose a question to my colleague from Kentucky. We've talked often about these issues, and I always learn a great deal. Of course, the Senate will be voting on the nomination of John Brennan, the Deputy National Security Advisor, to be the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. I voted in favor of Mr. Brennan during Tuesday's Intelligence Committee meeting, and I intend to vote for Mr. Brennan on the floor. Virtually every member of the Intelligence Committee now, in my view, believes that Mr. Brennan has substantial national security expertise and experience, and it's certainly my hope that he will be a principled and effective leader that the CIA needs and deserves. And I think Senator Paul and I agree that this nomination also provides a very important opportunity for the United States Senate to consider the government's rules and policies on the targeted killings of Americans, and that, of course, has been a central pillar of our nation's counterterror strategy. For several years now, Mr. President, I and colleagues, Senator Paul as well, have been seeking to get more information about the executive branch's rules for conducting targeted killings of Americans. And I'm pleased that after considerable efforts really that should not have to have been taken to get documents that the Intelligence Committee has been entitled to for some time, the committee has now received those secret legal opinions. Now, to be clear, and this was a point that Senator Paul made in the course of this discussion, targeted killings of enemy fighters, including targeted killings that involve the use of drones, can be a legitimate wartime tactic. And if an American citizen chooses to take up arms against the United States, there will absolutely be circumstances in which the president has the authority to use lethal force against that American. But I think it's been our view, a view that I hold, I know Senator Paul holds, that the executive branch should not be allowed to conduct such a serious and far-reaching program by themselves without any scrutiny, because that's not how American democracy works. That's not what our system is about. Our unique form of government is based on a system of checks and balances that will be here long after the current president and individual senators are gone. And sometimes from time to time, the senator from Kentucky and I say we ought to have something that we call a checks and balances, caucus here in the Senate. And that those checks and balances depend on robust congressional oversight. And frankly, they depend on bringing the public into this discussion as well, that there be public oversight. We share the view that details about individual operations do need to be kept secret, but the Congress and the public need to know what the rules for targeted killings are so that they can make sure, as Senator Paul has touched on in the course of this day, that American security and American values are both being protected. It's almost as if we have a constitutional teeter-totter, where we want both our security and our liberty. And this is especially true when it comes to the rules for conducting targeted killings of Americans. Mr. President, what it comes down to is every American has the right to know when their government believes that it is allowed to kill them. So now the executive branch has gradually provided Congress with much of its analyses on this crucial topic, but I think more still needs to be done to ensure that we understand fully the implications of what these heretofore secret opinions contain, and we have a chance to discuss them as well. Now, in his capacity as Deputy National Security Advisor, John Brennan has served as the President's top counterterrorism advisor and one of the administration's chief spokesmen regarding targeted killings and the use of drones. He would continue to play a decisive role in U.S. counterterror efforts if he is confirmed as director of the CIA. And the Intelligence Committee is charged with conducting vigilant oversight of these particular efforts. Now, a number of colleagues on the Senate Intelligence Committee of both political parties, I think, share a number of the views that Senator Paul and a number on this side of the aisle have been expressing today in the past few days. I'd especially like to express my appreciation to the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Rockefeller. There is no more committed to the principles that the CIA stands for. There's no individual more committed to the principles that the CIA stands for than Senator Rockefeller, and he feels that more needs to be done to ensure that Congress has the power to do responsible oversight. And Senator Udall and Senator Collins and Senator Heinrich are all ones that share that view as well. And in doing that, we recognize that we have a responsibility and that ultimately it's up to American voters to decide whether Congress is fulfilling its obligation to conduct vigorous oversight of the executive branch's actions and activities. So let me then turn to the question that has received most of the attention today and is really about what I'd like to explore for a moment or two with my colleague from Kentucky. The President has also said, I was encouraged by a number of his comments, including the State of the Union address, that with respect to counterterror efforts, no one should take his word for it, that the administration is doing things the right way. And as part of that, he said he was going to engage the American people in a discussion of these kinds of issues. And when it comes to continuing the public debate about the rules for conducting targeted killings, there are a number of questions that need to be explored, and one that I will address to Senator Paul involves this question that he and I have been interested in for some time, and that is the question of the geographic limitation with respect to the use of lethal authority. And Senator Paul and I and others have been asking for some time is what are the limits with respect to these lethal authorities, and in particular, whether they can be used inside the United States. And having listened to a bit of the comments made by Senator Paul with confirmation hearings tomorrow, we haven't gotten all of them, but certainly the point that the Senator has made this afternoon is an issue that I and others have asked of the Attorney General for some time, and we haven't been able to get an answer. We haven't been able to get an answer. In recent weeks, Senator Paul has sent a number of letters on this topic. He's received 2 responses, and he shared them with me. Now, I would just say, for purposes of this question, I think the response from John Brennan, and he stated quite clearly his view on this, was quite constructive. He said the CIA does not conduct lethal operations inside the United States, and most importantly, as per the conversations the senator from Kentucky and I have had, Mr. Brennan said the CIA does not have the authority to conduct those operations. So he was unequivocal with respect to what would happen if he was confirmed as the head of the CIA, that he would not have the authority to conduct those operations. So for purposes of anybody's kind of keeping score, I'd just say that Mr. Brennan, on the questions that the senator from Kentucky and I have been interested in, he was clear and forthright. And I've been interested in this for some time. I'm glad the senator from Kentucky has asked the question. We have now gotten an answer that is unequivocal from Mr. Brennan. So that then brings us to the second response from Attorney General Holder. This letter repeated the statement that the U.S. government has not carried out any drone strikes inside the United States and that the Obama administration has no intention of doing so. It goes on to say that the Obama administration rejects the use of military force where well-established law enforcement authorities in the country provide the best means for incapacitating a terrorist threat. I would certainly agree with this position. It's clear to me that prosecutions in federal court provide a tough, effective means for dealing with terrorist suspects, which is why there are a great many terrorists who are now sitting in American prisons today, locked behind bars, which is exactly where they belong. The Attorney General went on to state, and I quote here, "It's possible to imagine an extraordinary circumstance such as Pearl Harbor or the 9/11 attacks in which, quote, it would be necessary and appropriate under the Constitution and laws of the United States for the President to authorize the military to use lethal force within the territory of the United States." And this is what I'd like to unpack a little bit with my colleague from Kentucky. Having asked this question a number of times and thinking a lot about what the answer ought to be, on this particular issue, it seems to me that the Attorney General has certainly moved in the direction of what we wanted to hear. And I want to just kind of outline it, and I think we agree on most of it, and let's have a chance to exchange some thoughts. One of the core principles of American democracy is that we do not ask our military to patrol our streets. And it was important to me to hear the Attorney General emphasize that principle. I know that there are some who believe that the military ought to be given more domestic counter-terror responsibilities, like capturing and detaining terrorist suspects inside the country. I do not share that view, and I know that the senator from Kentucky does not share that view, and I am grateful that the Obama administration has now said they don't share that view either. In fact, as I have talked about it with a number of colleagues, I actually voted against the annual defense authorization bill for the past 2 years because I was concerned that those two bills didn't address adequately that particular principle. Now, the Attorney General then suggested what I think we would all consider an unlikely scenario, the Pearl Harbor, the 9/11 attacks, in which it would be actually lawful and appropriate for the President to use military force inside the United States. As I read that statement, and this is the point of my question to my friend from Kentucky, it sounds a lot like the language that is in Article 4 of the Constitution, which directs the United States government to protect individual states from invasion. In my judgment, if the United States is being attacked by a foreign power, the 41 attack on Pearl Harbor, the President can indeed have the power to use military force to defend our country. So the reason that I've been asking this question and have been interested in exploring it with my colleague from Kentucky is that I think it's extremely important to establish that unless you have an extraordinary situation, unless there is an exceptional situation like Pearl Harbor, the President should not go around ordering the military to use lethal force inside the United States. Our military, we're very proud of them, plays a vital role in efforts to combat terrorism overseas. But here at home, we rely on the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to track down the terrorists, and they do this job well. So I thought it was helpful to see the Attorney General, as part of what has been discussed here, clarify and establish that the President can only use military force inside the United States in extraordinary circumstances like the Pearl Harbor attack. So I just, in posing this question, wanted to ask, I know that the senator from Kentucky and I have had discussions over this, and I thought about it overnight and thought about our discussions, and my sense is that the senator from Kentucky doesn't believe that the Attorney General's response was clear enough. And I very much respect his view on this point. And one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of walk through briefly a little bit, of history is that I think there are some issues still to be debated on this issue. And my colleague has certainly been correct in asking valid questions because the Attorney General has left open the possibility of using military force inside the United States outside of the extraordinary Pearl Harbor circumstance that I have mentioned. So I say to the senator, I think you're raising some important questions. In fact, some of the most important questions that we could be asking here on the floor of the Senate. It seems to me that the Attorney General, has ruled out using military force inside the United States, except in cases of an actual attack by a foreign power. And I understand why my colleague from Kentucky would say that we ought to be engaging more with the administration and be asking for additional insight. So I want it understood that I have great respect for this effort to really ask these kinds of questions, force them to be debated on the floor. And Senator Paul has certainly been digging into these issues in great detail. And frankly, on the question of how we balance American security and American liberty, we have worked together often, and we're certainly going to be working together often on these issues in the days ahead. And I think I would just like to allow the senator from Kentucky to respond to my question, recognizing that while we might differ a bit on the aspect of the Attorney General's response that I have cited this afternoon, that in an instance of an extraordinary threat to our country, the kind of exceptional threat to our country, I do see, almost as part of what Article 4 is about, the President's ability to defend us in those kinds of situations. My colleague from Kentucky may see it differently, and frankly, he's raising important issues, and I'd be interested in his thoughts this afternoon.
Senator from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to thank the senator from Oregon for coming down to the floor, for being a champion for civil liberties, for being a champion for the Bill of Rights. And we get a lot of grief in Washington about lack of civility, people yelling and screaming at each other. And I think in my dealings with Senator Wyden from the other side of the aisle, it's been evident that people can be from different perspectives, find common ground, and also really try to get to a point which really isn't a partisan point. I've tried to make the emphasis since I've been down here that it's not so much about Brennan, that it's about the principles. I voted for 2 or 3 of the nominations, 3 of the nominations so far of the president, because I think he deserves some latitude in his political nominees. With regard to a couple of things, I think the senator from Oregon hit it really well, that the problem of we have this use of authorization of force on Afghanistan. Most people think that was going to war in Afghanistan. But now it's been so broadly interpreted that it means worldwide war basically forever. And that's sort of why we get into some of these problems, because not only is it worldwide, which is a big debate in itself, now worldwide means us at home too, and that the battlefield is here. I agree with Senator from Oregon that Brennan was very forthright, and it was a little bit onerous getting the response. But once we got the response, it was exactly what was appropriate. He said he would obey the law. The law is very clear. The CIA does not operate in the United States. The only problem is not with his response, but that the Department of Defense is the one directing the drone program, so it doesn't really answer the final question. On Holder's response, if it would have been written by the senator from Oregon as he states it, there probably wouldn't be so much problem. I think that maybe the recounting of the letter gives it a little more strength than the letter actually possesses in its own words. If he were to say that we were ruling out all strikes other than extraordinary strikes, that would actually be a pretty good letter. But instead he says that he can imagine, I suppose, under certain circumstances that, and he lists a couple circumstances. And the interesting thing is Pearl Harbor and 9/11, a lot of us agree. Probably you, probably me. We all agree we can repel a military attack. The reason we ask the next question, and the reason I'm concerned about the next question, and I've only seen the unclassified versions of these, but the unclassified versions of the drone attacks indicate that a significant amount of them are not killing people with a weapon. People like to talk about if you take up arms. Well, a lot of these people aren't in arms. It doesn't make them good people, but they aren't carrying arms around. They're not actively shooting our soldiers or us. And so the question becomes is, at the particular time they're killed, they look like non-combatants. And so if you have somebody who's sitting in a cafe in our country, even if they are a bad person, you'd probably rather arrest them. One, they would get the due process of our country. And then two, if arrested you and they were bad people, you might actually get some information from them. So I would like to see a little bit better wording. And then the last thing I would say, and then I'd appreciate hearing your response, is Attorney General was in the Judiciary Committee this morning and was asked a bunch of questions on this. And I've looked through the transcript of a couple of them, and it's still like pulling teeth. I mean, he was asked 4 times, do you think it's constitutional to kill someone in a cafe in Seattle or Houston or Louisville? And he kept saying it wasn't appropriate, but language is important. You know, when we're talking about this, appropriate's not strong enough. It's sort of like the president saying, I have no intention. We really just want to say he won't, you know, not having intention. So he finally didn't quite put it together in his response, but in his response combined with the questioning, you can get the opinion that maybe he thinks it's not constitutional to kill non-combatants having dinner. But boy, wouldn't it be a lot easier if they'd just say that? And at this point, I'd entertain a question without yielding the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Just respond to the senator from Kentucky's point in noting the fact that he would not be giving up the floor in the process. I think that the senator from Kentucky is making an important point, and the way I read it, it really would focus on ensuring that our country would be protected against those kind of exceptional circumstances. And I would just like to leave the discussion here by noting that I think both of us feel that this is just the beginning of this debate. The nature of warfare has changed so dramatically. We are going to have to, and I particularly appreciate the chance to work on this in a bipartisan way, we are going to have to be continually digging in and trying to excavate more information about how all of this actually works without in any way jeopardizing sources and methods and kind of ongoing operations. I think we can do it. And with respect to how I read particularly that part of the letter, and I thought a lot about it, I said, I think that the two of us and others who can be part of, we can call it the checks and balances caucus, but we can just make sure that people understand it's about liberty and security. I think we can flesh this out more in the days ahead. I know that I've had 4 sessions now with the classified documents that were made available as a member of the Intelligence Committee, and I still have a lot of questions. And some of those I think we will have to ask in a classified way, but I think others of them we can ask in a public way, and the two of us can work on that together. I also think there's a very strong case for beginning to declassify some of the information with respect to these drone policies, and I think that can be done as well, consistent with protecting our national security. So I think the senator from Kentucky has made a number of important points this afternoon. I thank him for the chance to work with him on these issues and look forward to continuing this discussion in the days ahead and appreciate this time this afternoon.